Hello everyone, Just Podcast TV is here. Please don't forget to like and subscribe and hit the bell icon to get notified on new contents.
Who is he? Explain. Officer Gardner yelled at the policeman and scolded him. However, when James saw the policeman, he grinned, because he recognized the policeman with just one look. He was the young policeman who went into the water to save people last night at the Tower Bridge. He remembered that he'd said thank you to him. That police officer then stood at attention and said, "Reporting to Officer Gardner, this man is the one the London Police Department was looking for last night. In one night, he eradicated the Black Bat Society, a cancer in the underground world of London." What? Say that again. When Officer Gardner heard this, he immediately turned pale with fright. The others were also shocked for a moment. The Black Bat Society had recently been rampant in London. They had committed many crimes and their methods were cruel. They also never left anyone alive. The entire city knew about them and everyone was anxious. The London police did their best to solve the case as soon as possible and eradicate the Black Bat Society. However, they were crafty and adept at concealment. The police had no idea what was going on, and they were already overwhelmed with anxiety over this case. They didn't expect that the mysterious man would eradicate them all in one night. More importantly, this mysterious man was their boss. How could they not be shocked? "He's the mysterious man from last night. He's also the VIP who the General Administration is looking for in the headlines for rewards," the young policeman said. When Officer Gardner heard this, he immediately laughed out loud. "Ha ha ha! The heavens are helping me." Then he turned around and looked at James with a smile on his face. He said very respectfully, "Mr. Tucker, we've really had a hard time finding you. Look, I've offended you, I'm sorry. How about this? I'll escort you to headquarters personally. The officials are waiting to see you. Sir, please?" Everyone was so shocked by Officer Gardner's sudden change that their eyeballs almost fell to the ground. This was too ridiculous. Weren't they all high and mighty just now? This reversal was shameless. Of course, Officer Gardner didn't sincerely want to change his attitude towards James. He was just doing it for the reward offered by the headquarters. This was because the notice for the bounty clearly stated that the first person to find the mysterious person who would help the police get rid of the Black Bat Society would be rewarded $200,000. Of course he was enthusiastic about it. At this time, James was laughing inside. In the morning, he'd casually said that what he did last night might be on the front page of the newspaper. He didn't expect it to actually be on the front page. He looked at Officer Gardner and said, "Oh, I'm sorry, Officer Gardner. I just took over the company and there are still many important matters that need to be dealt with urgently, so I can't accompany you right now." Officer Gardner's expression changed when James rejected him, which made Franklin and the others feel good. They knew very well that this new boss of theirs was probably going to start a fight and punch him in the face. Although Officer Gardner was very unhappy that James rejected him, for the $200,000, he had no choice but to suppress the displeasure in his heart. Then he forced a smile at James. He said, "Oh, that's okay. I'll wait for you here." "Oh, really?" James was surprised when he heard this. "It doesn't matter. I've been waiting for you here. So when you're free, we'll leave. What do you think?" Officer Gardner revealed the most sincere smile in his life. "All right, then wait here." After James spoke, he turned his head and said to Franklin, "Franklin, since Officer Gardner wants to wait here, can you make arrangements? Bring Officer Gardner a chair and some coffee. He's the most important person in the Excalibur Company. We can't be neglectful." "Yes, sir." Franklin quickly gestured for his employees to prepare the chair and coffee. Although no one knew what kind of big move their new boss was holding in, they all knew that he'd never let go of this officer who dared disrespect him so easily. Seeing James so enthusiastic, Gardner sat down without any hesitation. In an instant, he had an extremely good impression of James. He even quickly nodded to James and thanked him. "Mr. Tucker, you're too polite. All right, go ahead and do your work. I'll wait for you here." He drank a small mouthful of coffee while thinking about the $200,000. The feeling in his heart was really beautiful. But the next moment, the happy expression on his face froze, because he saw James walk straight to the police officer Gardner was in charge of and then said, "Officer, you know how to get to headquarters, right? I wonder if you're willing to take me there." The young police officer seemed to have never thought that such a good thing would happen to him. He was instantly dumbstruck and froze on the spot, but he immediately understood what James meant. He smiled excitedly and said, Of course I know the way to headquarters. I'm willing to work for you." "Okay, let's go." James smiled slightly and then stretched out his hand to signal. "Okay." The young police officer had always admired James. Now that he was able to personally lead the way for him, he was very excited. As for the people from the Excalibur Company, they saw their new boss putting on a good show. He actually completely played the greedy Officer Gardner. All of them couldn't help but laugh. They were really happy to see this and very satisfied. "Wait a minute." Officer Gardner suddenly stood up and said with an ugly expression, "Mr. Tucker, what do you mean?" James grinned and said, "Oh, Officer Gardner, can't you see? I'm going to see the leaders of your headquarters." When Officer Gardner heard James's words, he immediately understood that he'd been played. He was so angry that he almost spit blood. However, for the reward of $200,000, he held back his temper and asked, "But didn't you just say that you want me to wait for you here and then let me go with you?" "You go with me?" "Officer Gardner, you are the officer in charge of the security of this area in London. You have a lot of things to do every day. How would I expect you to go with me? It's nothing big. There's no need to make such a big fuss. Just let this young officer accompany me. Besides, I can't afford to have someone as important as you accompany me, right?" James laughed. After saying that, he pulled the young policeman out of the hall. Only Officer Gardner was left standing, so angry that he almost exploded on the spot. But looking at James's back as he left, he couldn't do anything about it. Edward also ran out. He still wanted to be James's driver. Since he'd already pledged himself to him, he wouldn't let go. In the car, the young policeman laughed happily. He'd long been dissatisfied with his boss, who only cared about money. However, his position was low, and he didn't dare provoke him. Today, James the hero had helped him put him in his place and made him feel very good. "So you're really amazing." After the young policeman smiled, he gave James a thumbs up and gave him a grateful look. James waved his hand and said calmly, "It's nothing. I don't need to teach him a lesson." Edward drove James and the young policeman to headquarters. After the young police officer went in to report the situation, the big shots inside quickly came out to welcome James. To be honest, it was more than a welcome. It was enthusiasm and worship. Because the Black Bat Society case had really given them headaches recently. Now James, this mysterious big shot, had helped them all solve the problem in one night. How could they not be grateful? The people at headquarters quickly prepared a grand award ceremony. The director of the General Administration personally gave James a hero medal. Everyone saw James as a great hero. After the golden medal was given, the director of the General Administration invited James to stay and teach the Kung Fu to all the police officers. However, James rejected his invitation with the excuse that he had a lot of things to do. The director gave James a warm look. He even patted his chest and said, "I'm a distinguished martial arts master. If you have anything to do in London in the future, you can call me at any time." His eyes and expression were sincere. James smiled and said thank you. He thought in his heart from now on, he could be considered a person with a strong background in London. He took 2 steps, then suddenly turned around. He patted the young policeman on the shoulder who led the way and said, "My respected director, sir, this young man is very good. He's a kind and honest man, a very excellent police officer. I think you should consider promoting him." The director immediately turned to look at the young police officer and asked with a smile, To be able to get Mr. Tucker's approval, you must be good. What's your name? My name is Hudson, sir. The young policeman stood at attention and gave him a standard police salute. All right, I'll remember you. Our police department needs talented people like you. I believe you'll receive good news soon. The director nodded and smiled. Okay, don't worry, Director. I'll continue to work hard, Officer Hudson said loudly. After exiting the London police headquarters, Hudson was extremely happy. This time, not only did he get a reward of $200,000, but he also got an opportunity to get promoted because of James's words. This made him really feel lucky. He was even more grateful to James. In his eyes, James was simply a king of luck. After saying goodbye to Hudson, James didn't go back to the Excalibur Company. Instead, he asked Edward to drive the car back to his home. It was already afternoon. After walking for so long, he was still a little worried about Cindy. He was worried that she'd been bullied by Vanessa. Although Krista was the talented woman in charge of the overall situation, he was still a little worried. In the end, he still had to face what he had to do. At the end of Edward's apartment, James had just gotten out of the car when Edward said to James, Mr. Tucker, I still have some matters to attend to at my bar. I won't be going up. You can go on ahead. I'll be back soon. Hey, no, you... Before James could say anything else, Edward left in his car. He didn't listen to James at all. He knew what kind of situation James would face when he went back. He didn't want any part of it. Seeing Edward run faster than a rabbit, James could only helplessly say, Hey, you're not loyal to your friends. But then he lightly coughed and said, What's so great about it? Isn't it just women? What's there to be afraid of? Don't tell me you're afraid of a few women. After saying that, James puffed out his chest and straightened his back. With his hands behind his back, he pretended to be a domineering man as he walked upstairs. However, just as James turned around, he heard a cold voice. What did you just say? He looked up and saw that it was actually the fiery Vanessa. His heart suddenly jumped, and he was stunned on the spot. Other than Vanessa, there were 3 other women standing behind her looking at him at the same time. The coldness in their eyes was exactly the same as Vanessa's. The 4 women's gazes were like frost as they landed on James's body at the same time. In an instant, James felt a chill all over his body. James couldn't help but shiver, but luckily his reaction was very fast. He quickly looked at Vanessa and grinned and said, Vanessa, why are you here? Why are you all here? James tried to change the topic, but Vanessa didn't buy it and asked again, What did you say just now? Yes, James, what did you say just now? Katie also walked forward and stood with Vanessa, interrogating James. Yes, that's right. The next moment, Cindy and Krista also stood up. The 4 women looked at him coldly and at the same time, waiting for his answer. Oh my God! What is going on? When did they stand together? James's eyes widened. He couldn't believe his own eyes. It had only been one morning. What had happened between these women that made the 4 of them look like they were one and they were united? How did they do it? He was still worried about whether there would be any problems with their relationship. Now it seemed like they were getting along very well. His worries were unnecessary. However, it seemed like it wasn't the time to consider this problem. These women were staring at him at the same time, waiting for his answer. He'd wanted to change the subject, but the 4 women still refused to let him go. It was obvious that they had heard what he'd said. Damn, why was his luck so bad? He wanted to pretend to be manly when there was no one around, but he was caught red-handed. There was no way he could be so unlucky. He seriously suspected that his luck had been used in the wrong place. All of this was inside James's head. It was a long story, but in fact, it was just a thought. So James smiled and admitted defeat in front of the 4 women. I didn't say anything. I was just complaining about Edward. His driving skills aren't that good. I almost puked. However, as soon as he finished speaking, 4 voices sounded at the same time. Is that so? Yes, of course. James nodded with certainty and gave a very sincere expression. James understood that he couldn't reason with women. At this time, he only needed to convince them and not admit it. That's right, he'd never admit it. However, just as this thought arose in his mind, he heard Vanessa snorting coldly. Since you're so dishonest, I'll personally repeat what you said just now. Could it be that I, a dignified man, am afraid of a few women? As Vanessa's voice fell, the 8 cold eyes instantly became even colder. What was even more terrifying was that 4 hands immediately stretched out, wanting to grab him. James saw that the situation wasn't good and immediately shouted and ran away. If he just stood there, he'd have to take their punishment. When the 4 women saw James run away, they immediately chased after him. James suddenly felt that this wasn't a blessing but a punishment. Once Cindy signed up for the group, it was simply too terrifying. Although the scene of 4 super beautiful women chasing after a super handsome man was really eye-catching, making them envious to the extreme, only James knew how it felt. In the end, James could only disarm himself and surrender, and he was berated by 4 beautiful women as he returned upstairs. The division of labor for the yelling was quite clear. Vanessa and Katie yelled into James's left ear together, and Krista and Cindy yelled into James's right ear together. That was simply terrifying. However, being yelled at by 4 women like that was a little painful, and when James didn't struggle, he actually felt a little comfortable. Maybe he was being a little shameless. But this was how flirting between men and women went. Thinking of this, James felt a lot more at ease. After fooling around for a while, James found out that the 4 girls were actually going downstairs to buy groceries. They said they would show their abilities tonight, and everyone would personally cook a dish for James. They were going to reward him, a man who was worthy of them entrusting their lives to. When James heard this, he immediately felt warm in his heart. It had to be said that they were diligent and virtuous women. Once they got home, the 4 women began to prepare themselves for work. James, on the other hand, had some free time. He laid on the sofa and watched TV. Although Edward's house wasn't in the most high-end residential area in London, the house he bought wasn't bad. The renovation was meticulous, and it seemed that the style and quality were good. However, the kitchen hadn't been used much, but this wasn't strange because he was single. Sometimes James really couldn't understand these men. They worked hard all their lives and never found a woman. He didn't know what the meaning of this struggle was. Perhaps this was a difference in culture. This kitchen faced the living room. James sat on the sofa watching TV and looking at the 4 beauties busy in the kitchen. He suddenly had a feeling of home. Time was quiet. Looking at this scene, the more James thought about it, the more time seemed to stop. However, he thought about it again. He really didn't know what kind of expression his mother would have when he saw them after he brought these 4 daughters-in-law back to his hometown. The 4 women were busy in the kitchen. They kept talking to each other and even joked around. Even Cindy, who had just joined, seemed to fit right in. This made James somewhat confused. Could it be that Cindy was so capable that she only needed one morning to convince Vanessa, Katie, and even Krista? The key was that it seemed like Vanessa and Katie no longer had any issues with her. They were good friends. They didn't seem to have any conflicts at all. James thought for a long time but couldn't figure it out. He might as well not think about it. Anyway, this was a good thing, and he hoped that they would live well. As long as the 4 of them could get along, he'd be free. So he laid on the sofa and leisurely watched TV. Not long after, Krista finished. Because she wanted to make a soup dish, she finished early and sat down to chat with James. James talked to her for a while, but he was still worried about them and that Cindy would be bullied. So he took the opportunity to ask softly, "Krista, what's going on?" Krista probably understood James's intention, so she deliberately took an opportunity to sit here. When she heard James ask, she immediately smiled and said, "Sir, you don't need to worry. Cindy is very brave and has learned before. She fits in naturally." "Ah, you settled it just like that?" James looked surprised and asked in a low voice. "Then how did she deal with it?" Krista looked at him and nodded, then continued. "Cindy told us how she met you, how she chased after you in college, and how finally you escaped death together last night. What a story. Then we women bonded. We felt that she was in love with you. Then the more we talked, the more we felt that we were on the same side. Then the problem was solved." James said, "That's all?" Krista said, "Yes, that's all." After James heard that, he sighed and said, "I really can't understand women. If you're an orange, I'd want to peel you open to see what's inside your heart." Krista laughed. That charming face instantly made James feel drunk. He reached out and gently touched Krista's cheek and said very affectionately, "Krista, you're really a beautiful woman." Being praised by James, Krista immediately laughed even more happily. Vanessa walked over and sat in front of James with her legs apart. She put her arms around his neck and pouted as she looked at him and asked coquettishly, "What are you guys talking about? Why are you chatting so happily?" "It's nothing." James showed his white teeth and grinned. A woman's tenderness was often accompanied by bursts of jealousy. He now understood how to deal with it carefully, especially this outrageously beautiful woman. "Mr. Tucker, you are becoming more and more biased now. It's not like I'm jealous of Krista. You've already dedicated yourself to her. I didn't even make a fuss about it." Vanessa pretended to be angry and pouted. But when Krista heard this, her pretty face instantly turned red. She quickly hit Vanessa and said, "Vanessa, don't speak nonsense. I'm still a virgin." Vanessa turned her head and playfully stuck out her tongue at Krista. She made a face at her and didn't listen to her explanation at all. James was just about to speak when he felt a soft and chocolate-flavored tongue reach into his mouth. He felt as if he'd been electrocuted in an instant, and then he became even more drunk. Whew! Whew! At this moment, not only were the other three women not jealous, they even started to cheer for their performance. Such a harmonious scene once again made James feel like he was wandering in an ocean of happiness. He was completely surrounded by love. In a man's life, wasn't this the kind of life he pursued? After a hot kiss, Vanessa became gentle and said, "Mr. Tucker, I was too fierce previously. Now I've decided to be gentle with you, so lie down. I'll give you a massage." "Okay." James nodded and laid down with a face full of enjoyment. However, just as he laid down, Vanessa's nose twitched. She sniffed and said, What is that smell? It seems to be perfume." "Krista wears the smell of roses. I wear orange blossom. Katie wears orchids and Cindy wears jasmine, but it doesn't seem to be any of those smells." James had just laid down when he heard Vanessa say this. He was instantly shocked. He knew things might change again. He didn't understand the world of women at all. One moment everything would be going well, and the next it was like a storm hit. He had to think of a way out of this quickly.